Okay, welcome everyone. This is Jonathan Lipp from the Big Apple Film Festival. Thank you all for being here. We are back for our second day of conferences. And this morning, we welcome filmmakers Jane Schoenbrun and Gita Malik. So hello, how are you today?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Hello.
I'm good. I'm here too. Hello.
Hello, Jane. How are you? Okay, good to see both of you. So we have been, this, as I mentioned, this is day 2 of our conference, and we've been talking about strategies for emerging filmmakers in areas like financing independent films, building a production team, distribution, as well as for screenwriters, ideas for selling and optioning scripts, acquiring representation, and all things like that. So we're going to address some of these, and we're going to try to answer as many questions as we can from the audience. But first, let me ask each of you to introduce themselves. So we'll start with Jane. Jane is the director of the feature film We're All Going to the World's Fair, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and is going to be released this year in theaters and on HBOMax. So Jane, if you want to tell us a bit about your background.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, good morning. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me. Gita, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I am a filmmaker, as Jonathan said. I am a trans non-binary person. I've been out for about 2 years. My pronouns are they or she, because I know some people get tripped up with that whole they thing. I'm somewhat new to filmmaking, although I've worked around New York in the independent film world for about 15 years now. I started my sort of journey towards becoming a filmmaker at IFP in Brooklyn, where I ran all of their narrative programs for a few years and wrote for FILMMAKER Magazine. After that, I worked at the company Kickstarter on their film team, where I was helping people do crowdfunding campaigns and think about how to sort of get their movies made in non-traditional ways. And while there, I was programming for various film festivals. I was starting to produce films of my own. I spent a few years making like a weird punk rock traveling touring TV show called the Eyeslicer. This sort of circuitous path towards finally taking the dive and making my own film, which, as Jonathan said, premiered earlier this year at Sundance and is getting put out by Utopia Pictures and HBOMax. And I'm developing bigger projects, and I can definitely speak to all of the things that Jonathan mentioned from both the filmmaker side, but since I sort of came from the other side of it all, I probably will have some input at, using my industry side of the brain as well.
Cool. Thank you, Jane. Okay. And Gita as well is a filmmaker, and her film India Sweets and Spices is actually premiering this week at the Tribeca Film Festival. So that's super exciting. So yeah, Gita, if you want to tell us a little bit about your background as a writer, director.
Sure. And just to say, I just got my hair and makeup done for a photo shoot. I don't always look this glam. But yeah, I'm here in New York right now. My film premieres on Saturday. I started out mostly as a writer. I came at this industry from screenwriting. So I was always a writer as a child. I started writing screenplays in undergrad when I went to UC Irvine. My last quarter of my last year, I started writing screenplays and realized I wanted to make those screenplays. I wanted to get what's in my head up on the screen. So I wanted to learn how to be a director. So I went to UCLA and got my MFA there in directing. And I was directing a bunch of short films. Everything I wrote, I directed, which was really fun. And then I made a tiny indie feature film called Troublemaker, right out of film school, run and gun. I was in LA, so we needed permits. We didn't get any permits. We got shut down a ton. It was, very, very low budget. All my buddies from film school, which was great learning experience. That went to CineQuest and a couple other small sort of niche Indian film festivals, and got small distribution through this company called Asian Crush. And it played on TV for a while. And then after that, almost right after that, after our festival run, I had my first kid. And while I was trying to raise my first kid, I started writing the script that would eventually become India Sweets and Spices. And then I wrote a draft, and then I had a second kid. And so my path has been very different from Jane's. But with this script, I won the Nickel and Austin Film Festival in 2016. That was what got me reps. That's what got me any sort of industry attention. And then my manager introduced me to a bunch of producers, knowing that I wanted to direct the film. And in 2019, we shot the movie in Atlanta, a satellite shoot in India, and then a shoot in LA as well. And now I'm here premiering it at Tribeca.
Awesome. Congratulations. Which day is your film premiering at Tribeca?
The in-person, we're doing the in-person on Saturday, and then there's a virtual premiere on Sunday, the 13th.
Very cool. All right.
Yeah.
Congratulations. So let me jump over to the Q&A here. So there's a question for Jane. What was one of the more difficult challenges in designing the programming for festivals, and which festivals?
Yeah, so, IFP a lot, but I programmed for the Montclair Film Festival for a little while, the Hamptons Film Festival. I think I screened for Tribeca one year. I've been around that world a lot. I think the most important thing that I would just share from the filmmaker side of things about festival programming is that it's not necessarily there is no such thing as the best film, right? There's no such thing as the empirically best programming slate. And so when you're, if you're lucky enough to have the freedom to program the slate that you want, you're very aware that you're programming, to a certain degree towards personal taste, but hopefully you're also keeping in mind a lot of other things. You're keeping in mind diversity, and I say diversity in all senses of the word, diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual preference, but also diversity in terms of genre, in terms of the form and language of the films you're programming. My personal interest, if you watch my film, you'll probably be able to tell, is in sort of pushing a little bit at the bounds of traditional narrative structure, and maybe leaning a little more towards experimental, and so I would always try to slip these films in, or films that were sort of more traditional but doing one or two interesting things. And I'd just like to give you a little inside baseball of festival programming. And I'm always, I'll say this, for me and for every good festival programmer that I know, there is nothing better than finding a film completely unknown from your giant pile of DVDs or now screener links, and just falling in love with something new. That was literally the coffee that fueled me through many late nights of watching movies. And I had that experience many times. I remember one year I took home, here's a tip, always submit early, because I'm sitting there, it's the beginning of the season, and I'm I want to start watching, but nothing's come in yet. So I just took home literally everything that had came in, watched 5 films. 4 of them I didn't really respond to, and 1 I was just this thing is incredible. I've never heard of this filmmaker. It's amazing. The filmmaker was Garrett Bradley, who just was nominated for an Oscar for Time, and it was her first film, Below Dreams. So submit early. But otherwise, the thing that I would say is that I would be lying if I said that who the filmmaker was and their previous work had no sort of bearing on how I watch things. I think most festivals track, most festivals either I did it, or an intern or an assistant would go through all of the submissions and sort of make a spreadsheet about what had come in and who the people involved with the films were, and you get emails. But what I always tell people is being on a festival's radar doesn't mean that you have to have one Sundance or made a giant blockbuster movie. It could literally mean that your first feature played at Cinequest, or and that's sort of what I would call a proper noun. I participated in a screenwriting program. I won a Nichols. I had a short at the Maryland Film Festival. These are the things that I would look for, because I would be all right, well, that tells me that this isn't just somebody straight out of film school. This is somebody who's starting to build a career for themselves as a filmmaker. And I want to be the one to sort of discover them early. All right, I think that's plenty of festival advice.
Cool, thank you. And Gitas, we had a question from Sam. He wanted to know what a satellite shoot is.
Oh, I maybe misspoke a little bit. It's satellite. It was just additional photography. That's what I meant. So we did most of our photography in Atlanta, and then I flew for a week to India, and then we had 1 day of shooting in LA as well. So gotcha. Satellite just meaning separate from principal photography.
Cool. All right. Thanks. Yeah. And if any other questions, any participants, feel free to type them into the Q&A box or into the chat box. Gita, you had mentioned about the Nichols Fellowship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
other than Nichols, what do you what's your feeling about screenplay competitions in general? I mean, do you think that they are overall of course Nichols is, but beyond, do you feel like they're beneficial for screenwriters?
Yeah, so I get this question a lot, and I think it's a really good question. I think you have to really be choosy. I think when I first started out, I was just sort of carpet bombing. I was like, anything that would, I just wanted to get some recognition, some motivation, whatever it was, something to maybe even put on a letter that I could send out to someone, hey, I won this, or I got quarterfinal in this. And the honest truth is that after doing all of that, I got really tired of doing that. And I felt like it didn't actually help me get my project made. That was the whole point of me entering these screenplay competitions in the first place, is I wanted to direct this movie. So I think you have to be choosy. I think it's better to work on your screenplay and just pick and choose the ones that they actually have a pipeline into what you want to do eventually. The Nickel is of course huge. That's the name that got me industry attention. The Austin Film Festival was great. I met my first agent there. So winning that was also a big one. Beyond that, I know there's some that have good reputations, but I would definitely do some research if you're a screenwriter looking to, it's just having these things on your resume doesn't help move your career forward. So I think it's really important to choose the ones that will actually get you attention from the industry.
Right.
Without naming.
Yeah, one of the biggest questions is how to get an agent. A lot of screenwriters and filmmakers ask that question. So you mentioned you met your agent at the Austin Film Festival.
Right.
How did that work? Was it at a panel? Was it like, how did you come in contact with your agent? How did you specifically at the Austin Film Festival? How did that happen?
Yes, specifically. So, I mean, it was really funny. I had won the award. So there was like an award luncheon. I think right after that luncheon or whatever, there were still a few panels. And I remember there was a panel for agents, and I was like, I want an agent. So I sat in the panel. And then there was one person in particular that I felt like was really bullish on spec scripts, was very encouraging, seemed to have a great vibe. And I approached that person after the panel and I said, hey, I just won this contest. And he was like, well, congratulations. And I was like, I'm looking for an agent. I just went right up to him and I was like, I'd love to come meet you in LA. And he said, sure. And so I went and met with him. He's since left the agency, but I'm still there. I'm at Paradigm. And yeah, so I was able to do it that way.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's such a big question. How do you get an agent? And there's always a lot of general answers, but that's very specific. You won the award, you went to the panel, you walked up to him afterwards. Got it.
Well,
all right.
Prior to that, I never had an agent before that. So I was in the same boat as everyone here, or
Gotcha.
Many people here.
All right. Thank you very much. We have a question here. I'm just going to read it from the Q&A box. On the same vein of some festivals tracking submissions, even though you don't do that so much, Jane, I've been told fellowships pay attention and flag people who are repeat submitters over the years and move them to the top. Is that something festival programmers do?
No, I don't. I never really did that. No, if it was somebody whose application really excited me one year, or maybe I read their screenplay and thought it had a lot of promise but needed another couple drafts, and then they resubmit or submit something new, perhaps I would remember, and give them a close look. But no, I can't say that there's much of a correlation between resubmitting and success. Although I have heard that I've had many friends who've gotten into the Sundance Labs, which at least in my world is like the sort of gold standard. And when I ran IFP, I would always tell people I ran the second best work in progress program in the country. Sundance Labs is like sort of the golden ticket for for independent films. I've heard from many filmmakers that they got into that program on their like fourth or fifth try submitting. It's I think they're pretty competitive.
If you go through the Sundance Lab, is it guaranteed your film's going to get made?
There's never a guarantee that your film's going to get made, but I think they do have a really great track record. I think if you look back at their slates from the previous years of their screenwriters labs and directors labs, you'd see like a lot of very familiar names in there.
Right. And do any other festivals have labs as well that you would know of?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of great labs, and a lot of them are more like sort of creative in focus. The Sundance Labs and the lab that I would help run at IFP were very almost like not creative. It was much more about like you've done the creative, like now we want to help you with the business side and sort of the like reality of trying to get a film made in America like this. Film Independent in LA runs, I don't know what it's called now. It was called Fast Track back when I was more in this world, but they have some great programs. The San Francisco Film Society has some great programs. If you live in Texas, the Austin Film Society is incredible. Yeah. And there are programs all across the country.
In those labs, are they like classes essentially? Like, are you sort of working with like an instructor?
When I was at IFP, we had like two sort of types of programs that we did. I really loved like the labs, the proper labs, where you would sort of like get together a small group of filmmakers that you really believed in and like sit in a room for a week and sort of close the door and say like everything that's said in here is confidential. And we would bring in people that we trusted from festivals and, filmmakers who had had success in the world, and just sort of like try our best to school people on the realities of things like getting an agent and getting a lawyer and getting your film sold. But then the other sort of programs that are very common are more like networking based, almost like this, but sort of like a little like kind of private. So like I would curate a slate of screenplays that I really thought like had potential each year at IFP, and we would do a week called, it was called Independent Film Week, where it was essentially like speed dating. Industry would come from LA, and you would just take like 10 meetings a day every half hour with various people who could potentially help.
So those are conference based, like for the most part, something like this, like small group sessions, so to speak. Like, yeah,
I'd say that like the speed dating stuff is more, it's more just like a giant, I would like literally schedule the grid, it's a giant grid of like 40 tables and 40 filmmakers and 200 industry people, and everyone is just meeting each other all day.
Right. So there's a question, I'm going to go over to the chat box a second. It says, what advice do both of you have for emerging filmmakers? The idea of being choosy is really helpful. And do you know any really good programmers or fellowships for queer filmmakers? So this question is for both of you. I don't know, Gita, you want to start?
What was the first part of that? Just general advice for emerging filmmakers?
Yeah, what advice do you have for emerging filmmakers?
I mean, I think I can speak anecdotally because I feel like everyone's path is completely different. So I can say for me, I think for me, it was really just important to educate myself a lot about filmmaking, to find out what I really liked, to follow my own voice. These are they feel like platitudes, but I think that's definitely helped me. I think, especially as a minority and a female filmmaker, I think, you get a lot of mixed messages. Oh, there's so many jobs out there for you, and yet no one is actually giving you those jobs. You're trying to chase a certain genre, you're trying to chase a certain whatever, a certain level, and what ends up happening is I feel like my voice was often decimated in those processes. So I think what's really helped me is to sort of clear away all that noise. And again, it's a very general piece of advice, but to clear away all the noise, focus on your own work, and there's no way to say it'll get made, you're going to make it if you just focus on your own voice, but just that at least you have control over that. Everything else you don't really have control over. I don't know if that's too general, but I think that's really important. Keep your own voice intact. Yeah.
Jane?
I would echo all of that. And I think it's so important. And I'm always like, I'm so thankful that I waited. And again, this is very anecdotal and personal, but I'm so thankful like I waited until my gender transition to start making movies, and to sort of also wait for my 30s to start making movies, and just like spend my 20s watching movies and like really understanding the language of cinema and the landscape for filmmaking. And I wasn't just right out of college, like shooting blind. I think if I had tried to do that, I would have been so kind of like infected by the expectations that I thought that like the industry that I had seen, in like multiplex cinemas, I would have been so infected by that thinking that I wouldn't have made something personal and distinctive and free. And so I think what Gita said is definitely the most important thing. I would just add also, I'm a big believer in like not waiting for the train to arrive to pick you up. I'm a big believer in like not waiting for like this concept of a green light. Although I think if you are trying to make maybe like more commercial or traditional work, there is like a friendlier perhaps ecosystem waiting for you to help you with that. But for me, I've always followed the like, and now post Sundance, like my career has changed significantly, but like, I was always a big believer in like, I'm not going to bother the agents until they bother me, and uh, for my film, it was really just like from day one, which was years before production started, I set out saying to myself, what do I think is within my means to make right now with freedom, and what's within my means, to sort of like not jump to the top of a ladder that I've imagined for myself, but to take like a good step to the next rung, rather than being like, I'm going to have my Hollywood dream and wait for somebody to come and knight me.
Right. And regarding the labs, actually, Sam mentioned in the chat, he applied to the Blacklist lab and the Outfest lab. Just one other question with the labs, are you actually on set at all, or is it mostly just primarily meetings and, script reading?
No, I mean, it's usually these labs are happening like pre or post production. So there's not really much on set stuff. Although, like a lot of the studios have like diversity programs to help sort of bring new voices to sets to help them sort of see and shadow and all of that.
Cool. All right. Let me go to the Q&A box here. All right. Agents always want us to be personal in our approach. How do we find them? Things like agent panels that Gita mentioned. Are there any great resource spots to find agent panels or to get to know them better? Twitter has helped a lot, but have been hitting some walls. Any idea on how to get to an agent? This is the $1 million question.
It really is. It's so hard. If I may, Jane, I feel like, I'm ruining my crazy hair here. I feel like I spent a lot of time early in my career trying to solve the agent puzzle. And again, this is coming from my anecdote. I feel like I could have spent that time more wisely focusing on my work. I really feel like, and this is hard to hear, I think, for a lot of people. It was hard for me to hear early on. You don't want an agent that's not excited about your stuff. I think you knocking on doors to say, hey, look at my stuff, read my thing, watch my movie. You may get a little bit of headway, but it's honestly, for me, again, personally, I didn't make any headway until I had done work that got their attention. I think pounding the pavement and things can help in certain cases, but approaching an agent in a panel, for instance, like I did, I just won the contest. If I had been someone who had just been attending or whatever, it would have been much harder to get their attention. And that's what my experience was up until that moment. So again, it's not great advice and it's not necessarily helpful to say this, but it is, I want to be encouraging, but I do feel like agents will come knocking on your door, and it's almost better to wait until that happens, because then they'll work for you. They're excited about you.
I couldn't agree more. And I will share that like I actually opted to not sign with an agent after Sundance, although I signed with like a management company, this company Range, that's like big enough that they're almost an agency. Here's the thing, like I knew the manager there, who's now one of my 3 managers, for 10 years before I signed with them through IFP and through other things. And I'd never once been like, I'm gonna be a filmmaker, here's my work. I made my movie and she heard about it through the grapevine and reached out, and I played a little hard to get. It really is what Gita's talking about. It's like, you want to make them want you. You don't want to want them, seem like you want them. And post Sundance, like I took maybe a dozen meetings with managers and people who I had years earlier, like submitted cold, screenplays when I was 22 to, and the most, they could look me up in their archives and see my desperate, didn't know better emails. And it really was like, it's a funny thing because, playing a festival like Sundance opens a lot of doors, but it's almost like a factory. Like I really got the sense from a lot of the agents and managers who were reaching out to me that like every year they have their assistant comb through these slates and they get on the phone and they're like, all right, if you're playing Sundance, I could probably get you, like another movie that, won't be that interesting, or a TV show to direct. And these are champagne problems, obviously, but I sort of got the sense that like they weren't so excited, like he was saying. And there were a few people that I talked to who just seemed so passionate about my work and so passionate about the things that I was passionate about like how the career that I want to build from here, which will be a different process than what I think most managers and agents are interested in, which is just like making enough money to sort of like write a report this month. And so it was really important for me, one, to sort of like wait for that right moment and just focus on the work, like Gita was saying beforehand. And two, to like, really, I was like interviewing them as much as they were interviewing me, and you want to be in that position, because I have so many friends who've gotten agents. Most agents, I talked to my filmmaker friends 2 years later, and they're just like, nothing changed, nothing happened.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. And by the way, Priya says, thank you so much. Both answers were really helpful. Yes, thank you. Let me go to the Q&A box. So Matthew asks, for both of you, what advice do you have for emerging screenwriters? You're a screenwriter just starting out. Any thoughts? Anybody want to take this one?
I feel like that one's you.
I'll take that one. It's similar to what we've been saying as far as focusing on the work. Emerging screenwriters, read a ton of screenplays, watch a ton of movies. The same thing I would say for anyone who's just a film lover, someone who's interested in film in general. I would say, again, don't get hung up on like what's in the market. I feel like there's a lot of that too. Like, oh, what's selling right now? What's in the market? Maybe I should write that and that'll help launch my career. I mean, I think if you want to do good work, if you are a writer, if you have this in your heart, to get really cheesy, if you want to, if this is your voice, if you want to follow this dream, I would try to just, again, clear away that noise and not try to follow any trends. Write something that you love, because that will become clear to anyone who reads it. They'll appreciate that voice. They'll appreciate the passion that went into it. In theory, I know there's a lot of hardships, even getting to those proper readers. But yeah, and I would say, again, research fellowships. Don't spend money on just getting like, oh, I entered this tiny little screenplay contest. Try to think of things that are meaningful that will help you get to the next rung on the ladder, as Jane said. If you apply to the big names, I think that definitely helps. What else? This is a personal thing. I would say, don't necessarily spend money on script coverage, script consultants, unless you've really vetted them, unless they, again, have a pipeline. You've seen successes come out of those programs. I don't know what else. I don't know what else to tell you. I'm a big reader. I read a ton of books too. So, just feel comfortable in your language.
One of the things that was mentioned was fellowship. Do fellowships differ from competitions, or from labs? Like what's exactly, how would you define the fellowships?
Well, for me, the nickel came with a stipend. A lot of fellowships, I think that might be worth looking into. Labs, I can't speak to as much as Jane. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these programs, it's just like, hey, congrats, you won. And then, there's nothing really beyond that. Mm-hmm. So again, yeah, I think fellowships and labs seem to have a little bit more weight behind them, depending on what they are, of course. But.
Right. Okay. So, let's say a screenwriter or a filmmaker decides that they want to try to make the film themselves. Obviously, getting the money together, getting the financing is one of the most difficult parts of the process. Can either of you share some advice on financing? I mean, where do you start? Let's say you got the script, and where do you go? Do you do a crowdfunding campaign? Do you start talking to family and friends? I mean, what route would you take? I don't know, Jane, you want to?
Yeah, I'm doing this with my next project right now, so I'm right in it. I know a lot of the people here in New York, at least, who finance like indies in my realm, which tends to be the like $1 to $10 million realm. And I didn't even bother sending them. We're all going to the World's Fair, which I wrote, like I said, to make in the woods with talented friends, with freedom. I knew, and I've had so many friends make their first films with these bigger companies. And these are the like indie, we want to help artists kind of companies. I'd seen the sort of like, even when you're playing at, let's say, like a $500,000 budget, which is a tiny budget, how much the market starts to like intrude on you and how much potentially freedom as a young filmmaker you're going to lose in that scenario. And I just like wasn't interested in that for this very first film. I felt like I needed to just go and prove myself, hopefully in the woods, like I said, and I knew enough people that I was confident we could make something cool together. But we still needed money, obviously. I wrote that movie, like I said, with limitations in mind. And I really wrote it so that like in a worst case scenario, it could be made on a cell phone with me and 2 actors. And that's what I would have done if I couldn't find the money. But I was going to say, back for the screenwriting question, the last question, my best advice for all of this stuff is to just get really good at rejection. Just get like really good at humiliating yourself publicly and privately. And that's basically what I did to raise the money for the film. I emailed anyone who had ever been nice to me, whether that was like somebody that I'd met in my personal life or somebody who I'd met through my work, or somebody who had seen one of the other things that I had worked on or made and seemed to like me. You know, I just emailed them and I was like, hey, I'm making this movie. I've got the script. I've got the lookbook. Do you know anyone with money? If you do, there's an executive producer credit in it for that person and for you. So I was trying to like incentivize these people basically. And that's, you know, I sent 50 of those emails and they're totally humiliating to send. But one of them led me down a path to a person who fully financed the movie, you know, and they're now one of my best friends, and it was an incredible experience. And it was like there's a company called Dweck Productions that was just starting out at the time. And it was really like what you as a young filmmaker dream of finding, which is somebody who like doesn't have a ton of money, but has enough to sort of like start building a career as a financier, and who like was really invested in what I was really invested in, which is like making a daring personal film, you know. And then when it came time for distribution, we had a few offers, and she was actually the one encouraging us to take the offer that was less money. And I was just like, this is like the dream executive producer. Oh my God, I want to take you with me wherever I go next. And on the new one, okay. I'm sorry, should I can talk about like the bigger, I'm now trying to finance a movie that's more in the like $5 to $10 million range, which is a whole separate realm.
Okay.
Should I talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So now it is like those companies, you know, it's these sort of like bigger financiers, and you know, I don't think I'm gonna find $5 to $10 million from like a dentist that, you know, like is just hanging out waiting to invest in film. And so you are starting to play within a system, and you are starting to have to like negotiate with agents and with you know, like these financiers and distributors who pre-buy film and the foreign sales market. And it's like a whole giant equation that I've had to learn. And I think it's really like a power equation. My managers have been helping a lot with it. And we're lucky enough, we're like taking meetings with sort of like production companies right now. And we have a few options of like people who will sort of shepherd the project through. And like the most important thing to me at this stage, who's again like with a script that people seem to like, and being lucky enough to like actually have a shot at making a movie at that level, it's not so much like who's going to give me the money, it's like who's going to give me the money and not ruin my film. It's like what power structure can I sort of like set up around this to ensure that like even if I don't have final cut, because I think that that's incredibly rare at this level of filmmaking, how will I know that I'm sort of protected, and like who is actually looking out for me versus telling me that they're looking out for me? I would like, if you get to this stage, I would really encourage you to like be thinking like that, because I've seen the opposite happen to so many people.
Cool. Yeah. What I was going to ask was, Priya had asked, you mentioned the lookbook. So Priya was.
Oh yeah, like, just like a document, visually imaginative document that sort of like overviews the basics on your film. I'm sure you could find examples of it online, sort of synopsis, logline, characters, an artistic statement, but designed really beautifully with like imagery that will hopefully be reminiscent of your film style.
Okay. And she was just wondering if you should have anything else with you before you head out to seek financing.
I mean, there's what agents call like a package, which for me, the package that we've been going out with is like my new script, the link to We're All Going to the World's Fair, because that's like the best thing that people can watch to sort of see what I'm capable of, the lookbook for the new project. And, you know, honestly, at this level, like the less the better in terms of, I think, like attachments. I think a lot of places want to help with those things. They want to help with like who's going to be your actors, who's going to give you the money.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So I'm just going to a question in the Q&A box. It says, for someone, let me ask, start with Gita. For someone exploring filmmaking as a second career in their 30s, looking for advice on whether film school will help my project get made, or does it tend to be more helpful for younger folks? So you want to start with that one?
I don't think age should be a barrier ever. I will say that film school does not help make projects. It certainly does not help make projects. For me, it was vital to go to film school because I didn't know anything about how to make a film. And that being said, I also feel very comforted by a structure like that. Like just knowing, okay, I got into this certain program. I think that helped me. Again, as a minority filmmaker, it just helps open doors. It gives you a little bit of validation that you wouldn't have had otherwise, I think, that I wouldn't have had otherwise. It's one thing for Tarantino to pick up a camera and be like, I worked in a video store for my entire life and now I'm gonna make my movie. And he seemed to have a very charmed path that way. For me, I really felt like I needed to educate myself and learn as much as possible. So that's why I went to film school. That being said, you get into debt going to film school. At UCLA, which was I'm so thrilled that I got to go there. I had a wonderful time with the program, but it's a good thing and a bad thing. You finance all your own movies. So it's really learning from the ground up. You have to figure out how to fund your own short films. And I don't come from, some people come from trust funds, some people have support that way. If you don't have financial security, it's very difficult, even in film school, to get through. All that being said, I had a great experience. I would never discourage anyone from going if that's something you feel. It was a conservatory. It was a place to create art with all these like-minded people. So it was really great for me, but it's certainly not the path for everyone. And there are certain pitfalls. It doesn't help you. It helped me in name only, saying, okay, she was something enough to go to UCLA. And that might all be in my head too, because there's so many paths in this industry. If you feel like you yourself want to be educated in a certain way, in a scholarly academic sort of way, then I think it's very helpful. If you already have a lot of film knowledge and you're secure in your voice as a filmmaker, it might not be as helpful. So.
Okay. Jane, what are your thoughts on film school? Did you recommend it?
Okay, so I like know a few people in my life who went to business school, and when you ask them like why they're going to business school, the first thing they say is that it's like, yeah, you learn some stuff, but it's really about like the connections to the other business people that you're going to make at business school. And all of my friends who've gone, especially to like grad film programs, I've seen a very similar thing happen where like every year the class that comes out of the Columbia grad program or the NYU grad program, they tend to stick together. I think that like for a lot of filmmakers, it's a place to like find your people and to like sort of say like, yeah, we're all going to make films and we're going to be the latest, greatest class of filmmakers. And, and I say this with a critical eye because I don't know that, these film schools should be, that like Gita said, charging lots and lots of money that only certain people can afford, should be the places establishing the future cliques of cinema every year. But I think that that's a reality, and probably like if you asked a lot of the filmmakers that I know who went through that, to be honest about the most lasting thing they got from those programs, it would be that. I went to undergrad film school at Boston University. I can't say I had a great experience. I always talk about my time working at IFP as my film school, because I learned there the reality of like trying to get work made right now. And I think that coupled with, as Gita was saying, like a lot of study and a lot of looking really closely at yourself and at work about like what you want to make as an artist, like that's the sort of combo attack of knowledge to get.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, sorry, I was just going to completely agree. You're totally right, Jane. It is friendships and networking as well. Not networking in a sleazy, slimy way, because you're all there and no one has any idea what the hell they're doing. But those are the relationships that came out of there have proven to be really helpful for all of us and fruitful. Besides being genuine friendships, we work on each other's projects. My best friend from film school shot my first film. So I didn't have a filmmaking community. I didn't know how to get into that filmmaking community, and so film school helped me do that. Yeah,
it's interesting. That's such a big question about film. People always ask about film school. Do I need film school? But what's not talked about enough is that it's not just about the learning, it's community building, right?
Right. Well, it's funny. My first film was shot by somebody who I met in the IFP labs, 15 years ago. And, I think that like the community is what I think largely you're looking for. And you can find that in different places, depending on where you are in the country.
Yeah. So, all right, lastly, I just want to ask you, this is such a networking type of business. What are some places you would recommend that emerging filmmakers and screenwriters can network with more established people like yourselves and other people who work in the business? Where are some good places that we can network? Jane, you want to start with that one?
Sure. If you get into film festivals, make a short, make many shorts. If your first short doesn't get in places, make another short, keep applying. I think that's by far the best place to find your community is like on the festival circuit. And it's wicked fun. Like I'm going to 2 festivals this month, and they're the first like in-person festivals for my film, and for anyone, I think in a couple of years. And I'm just so excited to have that experience again, because it was so formative to me of I'm going down to Dallas for the Oak Cliff Film Festival, and I'm just going to watch great movies for 5 days with other filmmakers who are there and excited, and there are going to be dance parties, and we're going to get tacos, and I'm going to come away from there probably with some like new close friends who I could collaborate with, or who knows, maybe, Dallas has a lot of rich people, maybe someone who wants to give me some money to make something, but like always, all of the success that I've had, like I said, I met my manager at 21 when I was interning. She at the time was like trying to become a comedian, and I was PAing on a set that she was acting in. And it's very rarely like here's my business card, it's so much about finding your people and finding like-minded souls who like care about similar things that you care about, and want to implement small changes to this landscape in this similar way that you do. And like going to the places where you think you're likely to find them, and just looking like you would look for a human being that you care about, not like a person who can give you a check.
Yes, fully agree on all of that. And I think that's the key is finding people that you vibe with, finding people that you can genuinely collaborate with and be friends with, good people. If it's not, you're exactly right. I think it's not about dealing out business cards. It's not about you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Like networking, the term gets such a bad rap because it comes off as sleazy and as very you're using each other. Yeah. You don't want to go into this thinking, I just need this from you. You don't want to ask people for that. So yeah, I think film festivals for sure. These labs, film school. There's a lot of places. I'm from LA. And Film Independent has seminars, and they have programs there. Project Involved is a diversity program that I did a few years back, and I met some great people through that. So
cool. All right, and just in the last minute here, Matthew said Jane alluded to a consortium of financiers. Who are some?
We need names.
Maybe consortium sounds like there's like a I don't know, I'm just picturing like Mr. Burns at a table with like a lot of like evil supervillain types. I'll tell you what I did after Sundance, because like I've just learned to do this throughout my career. Like I shelled out the money for an IMDb Pro account, $20 a month. Mm-hmm. And I Googled and I looked through the Sundance lineups from the last 10 years, and I Googled every film that seemed like it had been made in a similar genre for a similar price point to the second project that I'm trying to get made. And you could literally click through and see who the financier was, see who the company was, see who the distributor was. And I just made myself a long spreadsheet of names and sent it to my managers and was like, who are the people here that are normal? Like set me up for a general meeting with them if you can. And so like I think it just takes research, to find the people that are going to be right for you, potentially. I will say that like one thing that's been a dawning knowledge to me that I never really thought about before is that like we're actually not going out to financiers right now on my film. We're going out to production companies, banners that because we've never made a $5 or $10 million film before, my producers and I, like it's both like godparents, as I describe them, who can like sort of watch over us and give like almost a seal of approval to the financiers of like, yeah, we know how to make films, us. trust Jane to make this film, and we'll make sure they make a good film. But it's also like the brand can be really powerful. Like if it's the right sort of company with a lot of cool credits and their like star meter rating or whatever is like high enough, they're sort of taken seriously and could really like turbocharge a project. I don't, it's like we're talking to 3 or 4. I don't want to say their names necessarily, but like if you invest the time in this research, you should pretty quickly start to sort of like see familiar names crop up on a lot of the bigger indies of the year.
Cool, thank you. All right, so I want to thank you both for being here. Jane Schoenbrun, whose film We're Going to the World's Fair is coming out theatrically and on HBOMax, so look for it. And Gita Malik, your film, Indian Sweets and Spices, premiering this week at the Tribeca Film Festival. Awesome. Tribeca's back in person. All right. Yes. Very cool. So thank you both so much.
Oh, it's so nice to meet you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you both, and thank you for the participants. And we'll see you again real soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.